Well, welcome to today's presentation on the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program and what you should know. My name is Keely O'Sullivan-Kurtz. I am a CNP and I'm the Director of CNP Programs at the Nonprofit Leadership Alliance. Today's agenda is going to include a Q&A session. It's a bit of a fireside chat between our two hosts. Following that Q&A, we'll head into a time for you all to ask your questions. So if a question comes to your mind throughout the presentation, please share it in the Q&A widget at the bottom of your screen, and our hosts will be sure to address them at the end. Without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce today's hosts. Jason Anderson is the owner of Gradmetrics LLC. It is a college and student loan planning firm. He is also a lecturer and academic program associate at the University of Kansas School of Business and a doctoral student in the personal financial planning program at Kansas State. He received his CNP certificate in 2009 at Rockhurst University and graduated with a degree in nonprofit leadership. Welcome, Jason. We also have today our interviewer. Interviewing Jason is a CNP learner from the University of Northern Iowa. Tabby Robinson is a senior who is working toward her December graduation. Take it away, Tabby.
Thank you. So to get started today, Jason, can you just tell us a little bit more about what the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program is?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. Yeah, you can see in my name, CNPs at the very beginning. The CNP was my first certification, and then I just never stopped. So yeah, happy to be here. Gradmetrics is a firm that I created to work in the space and have been doing college and student loan planning for a while. So talk about all sorts of different student loan topics, and public service loan forgiveness is one that this year is really exciting. So maybe you've heard of public service loan forgiveness. A lot of people talk about it as a 10-year forgiveness program. So if you have federal student loans, and you work in a number of different sectors, so government or nonprofit or military, and actually Peace Corps and AmeriCorps fall under here as well, then you have the opportunity, if you make 120 qualifying payments, to get your loans forgiven after that time frame. And historically, we'll talk about kind of the program as it was created in 2007. So it's a pretty old program, but we essentially have 4 criteria that you need to meet. The first is that you work full-time for qualifying employers. We talked about that. The second is that you need eligible loans, and specifically you need direct loans. That's a big piece. Next, you need to be in an eligible repayment plan, and specifically that is in the original plan, or the original public service loan forgiveness would be an income-driven repayment plan. And technically, the standard plan also qualifies under that. And then finally, the 120 qualifying payments. And I would say, and I like to tell people, you know, we talk about public service loan forgiveness as a 10-year program, but it's actually technically 120 qualifying payments. So we take that 120, we divide it by 12, of course, 10 years. But it's an important distinction to think of it in 120 qualifying payments. So that's what public service loan forgiveness is, at least how it's been historically. And we'll talk about some of those additional changes as we go along.
Great, thanks so much. Why would this matter for CNPs, those who have already been credentialed and those who are in my position as a student or not quite have their CNP yet? What does that mean for us?
Yeah, absolutely. So on two ends of the spectrum here, and I work on both sides. One is college has gotten insanely expensive, okay? College is actually inflating at faster clips than inflation itself, although inflation is starting to heat up right now in the economy. But it's ridiculously expensive to go to school right now. And so if you're a current CNP, I don't have to tell you that, you probably have loans to prove it. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you're going into a field. I got my CMP, my undergrad's in nonprofit leadership from Rockhurst University. And, you know, I knew I was going into the sector and probably not going to make a lot of money. That's not why I did it. That's not why many people go into nonprofit. They want to make an impact. And so if you work for a 501c3 or another eligible nonprofit, this can be an opportunity to do good by society and then get those loans forgiven after you've made a lot of payments. Now, this is not a handout, right? You've made 120 qualifying payments, but the government after that will forgive the balance. And so, by the way, public service loan forgiveness is tax-free. And I'll insert my disclaimer here. None of this should be construed as financial or tax or legal advice. But public service loan forgiveness is a tax-free program. So that's another perk, and that wouldn't be true of other loan forgiveness programs. I want to say one other thing here. So a lot of CNPs go into nonprofit, of course, and 501c3s are eligible. Some go into government, and government entities at the state, local, federal, tribal levels, and military are also qualified. And then finally, I would say, if you're not a 501c3, don't count yourself out. So there is kind of an additional inclusion where it says if you're in a nonprofit that's not a 501c3, but you offer public service, that you could still qualify. And public services, I'm not going to go through the whole list, but it's things like emergency management, military is involved in there, law enforcement, public interest law services, early childhood education, public service to the disabled or elderly. And so there are a number of other categories you might fall into, and that might qualify you for public service loan forgiveness, even if you're not a 501c3.
Awesome. That's good to hear. Lots of options for how you can qualify. Where would someone go to find out if they qualify and like fill out the paperwork to get the process started?
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of your place of all things student aid would be studentaid.gov. And really, this holds true kind of through the entire life cycle. So for those of you that are CNPs and still in school, this is where you go to fill out the FAFSA, right? So you're familiar with this website, and everything you need to know in terms of student loans, federal student loans, is going to be located on this site. But if you have loans currently, you probably realize that this is kind of your dashboard where you can log in and see all your loans in one place. Now, you might also be logging into other sites in terms of servicers or what have you, but this is your one-stop shop to figure out what you have in one place. And so there's a couple things. One, that's a great place to get an overview of your loans, and that's important as we get into the next topic. But the next thing is you can fill out your paperwork for PSLF through a paper form, but the best way to do it is the PSLF tool. And so the government has put together kind of a widget, I guess, to guide you through the important points of filling out your public service loan forgiveness paperwork, and you can use that to help you through this process.
Fantastic. So you mentioned our next topic. We're going into the news that hit around October 6th with the U.S. Department of Education announcing a temporary period where borrowers can receive credit for payments that previously did not qualify. What does that mean for the public service loan forgiveness program?
Oh, I'm so excited. So glad you asked, right? It's not like I already have the script ahead of time, but hey, I'm really, really excited about this. I mean, anybody that you know, I'm glad you're on the call, but if you know anybody working in nonprofit or government, please let them know about this webinar. Give them my email, jason@gradmetrics.com. I mean, this is an incredible opportunity. So we talked about the 4 main criteria for public service loan forgiveness. And actually, if you've read anything, and you maybe even be one of the victims, but there's a massively high reject rate when it comes to public service loan forgiveness. Then they introduced a second program called temporary public service loan forgiveness, and it had a high reject rate. The program that was supposed to help the high reject rate program had a high reject rate. So it's been a nightmare from the beginning. Well, we know this, and we've seen this play out. And so the Department of Education on October 6th essentially used COVID powers. It's kind of their emergency management powers to say, we're going to suspend some of these requirements. And so what does that mean for you now? To boil it all down, really the only 2 requirements that matter now are that you're working for a qualifying employer and that you're working full-time. Okay, so check that one off the list. Most of you on this call are going to meet that criteria. The second is that you have direct loans or that you consolidate into direct loans. And so if you have those 2 things, the department is actually going to go back and they're going to be like, we don't care if you have a late payment, a partial payment. We don't care if you're in the wrong repayment plan. A number of these things that used to matter don't matter anymore for a temporary amount of time. And so as long as you have those first two criteria, you're going to go in and do some specific things that I can outline for you. And the Department of Education is going to give you credit where they wouldn't have before. So that's the bottom line. And there's already people today that have filled out their paperwork, got rejected in the past, and they're automatically being given public service loan forgiveness. And it started, I think, like 2 weeks ago. The Department of Education is projecting like $2 billion in forgiveness due to these changes. So that's incredible. I hope you're one that make the list because it could be significant for many borrowers, and it will be.
Yeah, super exciting. I'm gonna go into some of the questions just because they are pretty relevant to what you're talking about right now. But
Yeah,
we have a
sure.
couple people asking if you can define what full-time means for qualifying payments, and then do they have to be consecutive?
Yeah, don't have to be consecutive. Oh, hey, where'd my video go? There we go. Hey, I went offline there for a second. Okay, so they don't have to be consecutive. That's why I do say it's not a 10-year program, it's a 120 qualifying payment program. And what was the first part of the question again?
What qualifies as full-time? How many hours a week? What's that?
Yeah, so the full-time piece, now generally we would think 40 hours a week, right? But it's actually by many employers defined by the employer itself. And so what your employer considers full-time may differ from employer to employer. So that'd be a great question to ask your HR department. Hey, who is considered full-time? And relevant to this, if you're a contractor working for a nonprofit, that doesn't qualify. You have to directly work for the nonprofit, not in a contractor status.
Awesome. So where else can they go to find out if the changes affect them in their specific?
Yeah, and actually that's where I think the next thing maybe on the agenda for us is what are the steps that you need to take to get this loan forgiveness? And really there's three buckets that you might fall into. The first is if you qualify or if you have loans that are not direct loans. So you're going to go to studentaid.gov, you're going to log into your or your dashboard, you're going to look at what types of loans you have. And so if you have other loans besides direct loans, let's say you have a FEL loan, an FFEL loan, maybe you have a Perkins loan, then this is what you're going to do. You're going to go in, you're going to verify that that's the case, and then you're going to check your eligibility. So you're going to make sure your employer is eligible for this program. You can check that with the Public Service Loan Forgiveness tool. After that, you're going to consolidate your loans, and you have to do that to be eligible for this program by October 31, 2022. So you have to complete that consolidation. And then once you complete the consolidation, then you fill out your public service loan forgiveness form and you submit it, and you will go in once that's approved and you'll see how many qualifying payments in your dashboard you have. So that's one bucket. The next bucket is if you have direct loans. So you go into the dashboard, you check, and you only have direct loans. Then what do? If you haven't submitted your employment verification through that public service loan forgiveness form, you need to do that. That's your next step. And so you can do that with that public service loan forgiveness tool, verify that you're eligible for the program. Then you're going to see your qualified loan count or qualified payment count go up. Okay. Bucket number 3 is you poor souls that have potentially gotten rejected in the past. Okay. If that's the case for you, or you're in direct loans, you've submitted your paperwork. Actually, the Department of Education is working on your case right now, whether you know it or not. So you need to verify that. If you have any employment, public service loan forgiveness employment that you haven't verified, you need to do that. But then actually the Department of Education is, and the loan servicer who works on public service loan forgiveness is actually verifying now based on the new criteria. And so you should in the next, well, we don't really know timing, but you'll log into your portal and you'll see that count go up based on these new criteria, or you may see that it gets forgiven. By the way, one of the crazy things about this program is if you have paid over 120, if you qualify for this program, and let's say you've made 130 qualifying payments, under this program, they might refund you. for the overage, which is incredible. So if you like got rejected and you kept on paying and you're at like 160 now, you may end up with a pretty big check at the end of this deal, which is pretty exciting. So.
Awesome. Before we go into the Q&A, I have one more question, and then you can add anything that you want to add before we go into questions from the audience. But if people don't qualify for the public service loan forgiveness program, what other ways would you recommend to deal with their loans? Like they're not going in the nonprofit sector, they don't qualify under the new criteria.
Yeah, there are loan forgiveness opportunities outside of public service loan forgiveness. And one of the main ones that I would throw out there right now is if you're in an income-driven repayment plan, those actually have loan forgiveness. It's called long-term loan forgiveness. So this is no panacea, okay? You're gonna make an incredibly long tenure of payments, 20 or 25 years to be exact. But those income-driven repayment plans, if you're really struggling with your loans, let's say you went off to a for-profit company, you're not in the nonprofit or government sectors right now, you're not in military, but you still need help, that's one of the best ways to do it, is to get into a long-term loan, a long-term repayment plan and get the long-term loan forgiveness after 20 or 25 years. There can be some tax implications to that, so make sure you talk with somebody who knows what they're talking about in this space. But that's one way to kind of, I guess, get control of the loan payments and make it manageable in your financial plan. And there are actually right now talks of some modifications to some long-term loan forgiveness programs. The next thing I would say before we go into Q&A is temporary public loan forgiveness. I had mentioned that temporary public service loan forgiveness, TPSLF. Okay, there we go. That was a program that was primarily meant to plug one of the main reasons why people didn't qualify for the original program, and that was being in the wrong repayment plan. And so there was a question about that I saw pop up. That's what a temporary public service loan forgiveness was about. Again, this waiver has kind of brought us into a new era of qualifying. It is temporary waiver, but it's a really great program. Second thing I would say is if you have federal student loans, you realize there's been a few other perks of going through COVID, and specifically that is that you're not making payments and that your interest has not been accruing. And so in that scenario, actually the payments that you're not making, as long as you're a qualifying employer and some of these other items, you're actually getting credit for the payments you're not making towards public service loan forgiveness. So that's another incredible perk that's happening during COVID-19, is you'll get credit for all those times you didn't pay, which, I mean, talk about any other government program, who goes back and retroactively gives you stuff, who gives you refunds, who gives you credit for payments you don't make. Like, there are some pretty incredible perks right now to this program and some of the COVID relief measures when it comes to federal student loans.
Awesome. One question that's come up a couple of times is specifically about Parent Plus loans and how they fit into the public service loan forgiveness program.
Yeah, so they don't. And there's a couple things, really public or Parent Plus loans. And there is one caveat to this, but it's a very niche kind of strategy. And so if you're curious about that, you can always email me at jason@gradmetrics.com, but it's not something I'm going to go into on this webinar. It's just kind of out of the scope. But generally speaking, what your options are with a Parent Plus loan is, one, you're not going to be eligible for repayment plans or income-based repayment plans. Income-driven repayment plans is what I should say. But if you consolidate, you can become eligible for ICR, income contingent repayment, and it does have long-term loan forgiveness. So that's one thing that some Parent Plus loan holders do, is they'll consolidate into a direct loan, and then they are eligible for ICR. But generally speaking, really the public service loan the Parent Plus loans are not eligible for PSLF, but barring that one very niche strategy that we won't get into.
Great, good to know. We have a couple of people who are concerned about when you say temporary, what does that mean for the temporary?
Yeah, so temporary, well, really, when we talk about the waiver, it's temporary and that it has a deadline. So for instance, if you don't have direct loans right now and you need to do a consolidation to get into a direct loan in order to become eligible for this waiver program, you have to do it by the deadline, which is that October 31, 2020 date that I'd mentioned. So yes, it is temporary. And part of that is because this is really it came from the HEROES Act, but the Department of Education has used their discretion to make these changes, but it's all under the idea that this is a COVID relief measure. And hopefully COVID is not around, at least in the type and way that it is right now forever, and neither will this program. So that's why, again, when I heard about this program, I reached out to everybody that I knew, like, hey, how can we get this word out? Because it is temporary. And if you didn't have the right loan, so you didn't consolidate by this deadline, you're not going to be eligible for this program.
Great. So just to clarify, by October 31st of 2022, you are into the program, you've applied, you've been accepted. Let's say you have 50 more loan payments to make. All of these criteria you're going to go through for those 50 payments.
Yeah, so you're so essentially it kind of goes back to those three buckets as to how this is going to affect you. What this program is great about is it's going to go back and give you credit for payments that weren't previously qualified. And so this waiver in many respects is kind of retroactive is really the power of it. So that's more so what we would be concerned about here, is getting in by the deadline such that you can get credit for those things that didn't previously qualify because the requirements have been relaxed, essentially. But yes, there is a chance that you don't have to take any action, right? If you're in that third bucket, where you've already previously submitted all your PSLF documentation, maybe you got denied, you will likely just automatically, this will happen for you. But for other people, like people that need to consolidate, action needs to be taken by a deadline for sure.
Great, thank you. An anonymous attendee asked to clarify about the income sensitive repayment plan. Is that okay for when you're on public service loan forgiveness?
Yeah, so the income driven repayment plans, there are several. You probably recognize the names like ICR, IBR, old and new, payee, repayee. These are all what we call income driven repayment plan options. And all those are eligible for loan forgiveness programs, even for the original program.
Great. Good to know.
Sorry, I should say eligible for public service loan forgiveness, right? And then they also have that perk of long-term loan forgiveness that we talked about earlier.
Good deal. How would someone know to mark or count the payments that weren't made during COVID?
So that's what if I'm understanding this question correctly, that's what the public service loan forgiveness form is for. So that's essentially to tell your servicer you're raising the hand of the servicer that runs this program, and you're saying, hey, I want to be eligible for public service loan forgiveness. Please verify my payments to make sure that I'm actually making progress towards this program. And so you're essentially asking for them to verify the payments that are eligible. That's what this whole form is for. And then of course, if you get 120, then you get your loans forgiven. And so you're essentially raising your hand, you're asking to be qualified and to get those payments qualified. So that's what you would do through filling out the form. You're saying, hey, I'm making sure my employer is eligible, I'm making sure that my payments are qualified. And then once you do that, it'll actually show up as qualified payments in your student loan data file. So like if you pulled that and put it in a tool that's going to show you some cool data, or you gave it to somebody like me and did a student loan plan, it would show how many of your payments qualify after you did that certification.
Okay, good deal. And then just a couple people, we might have already answered it, but just to make sure, those who have worked at a 501c3 full-time in the past, say 3.5 years, they took a break. Now they're coming back. Those payments qualify while they're working for.
Yeah, you got it. Yeah, and you would want to certify those two different employments. I kind of mentioned that in bucket 2 or 3, I guess, but probably both. But you would want to, let's say you worked for a nonprofit for 3 years, then you went for for-profit for a couple of years, and then all of a sudden you went back to nonprofit, you've been working for 5 years. You would need to use the public service loan forgiveness form to verify both of those employers. But that would, again, it's 120 qualifying payments. It's not 10 years. And so you're going to get a certain amount of qualified payments from that first employer. Then you're going to continue with that second employer until you get to 120. And that's what would qualify you to get it forgiven.
Great. So 20 years of nonprofit experience, you're out of the field now, you still can qualify.
Yeah, go back. Rock and roll, as long as
How
you're making
exciting.
payments, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and even now, like a lot more is going to qualify as a qualifying payment, as we've discussed. And so, yes, I mean, you're out, you're making great money as a CEO for a for-profit firm, but you've got 10 years in the past for a nonprofit, you're still paying on your student loans. Oh yeah, let's fill out that PSLF form and get you some forgiveness.
Awesome. Yes, so Melissa, I'll verify this, but she said you can do it retroactively. So
Yeah, so
when you apply and you're approved, you can still go back and do it.
Yeah, that's the whole idea of this program. Is it is retroactive. It's going to look at some of those payments that maybe didn't qualify in the past and certify them as qualifying payments. And so that's kind of the whole idea of this program. But yes, you don't. And actually, that is one of the other things. So if we want to get really technical, I'm trying to keep it 30,000-foot view. But the old program, when you went to go apply for public service loan forgiveness, you had to be working in a nonprofit at the time that you applied. So like, let's say you got 10 years, you went off and you're working for a for-profit firm, or you retired or whatever, and you're applying for loan forgiveness. Under the old program, that would not fly. And that's one of the reasons why people got rejected. And so now that actually under this waiver program, you can actually apply. Like, I could be working for a for-profit firm, go back and get all the credit for that. And I don't have to be currently working for a nonprofit while I apply for the forgiveness. And so that is actually one of the very technical and niche, but one of the great things about this program that would be in opposition to the way the original program works.
That is so exciting. And
Yeah,
kind of
Melissa says, wow. I say wow too.
Yeah.
Because I have scenarios that I've seen that penalize clients, and it sucks, you know. And so I'm glad the waiver is kind of parted the sea before us, right? At least for a temporary period.
Yeah, that's so great. So for our retroactive, we're good to go. You've worked in a nonprofit any point in your life, you should apply if you're still paying student loans.
And that's the thing, like don't do all the calculations right now. Just fill out the paperwork. The servicer could tell you, no, it's not qualifying or what have you, but why not fill it out? Like, just fill out the paperwork, see what comes back. Now, I will also tell you, servicers are not known for their great customer service, okay? And maybe you've experienced that too. Hopefully this isn't recorded and sent off to the servicers. But you as consumers probably know that they sometimes don't always do what is expected or right or what have you. And I mean right isn't not as in ethically right, but like correct. And so if you do fill this out and you really think that you should be getting credit and the servicer says no, it's not out of the wheelhouse to push back a little bit and really question them and say, this is why I think I qualify, and why do I not, and explain this to me, because sometimes they make mistakes is what I'm trying to say, and you want to kind of know your stuff. Speaking of which, I don't know if we'll send out the link, but if you just Google kind of PSLF temporary waiver, you'll find the announcement, and it has FAQs. It has those 3 buckets that I talked about. It has all the information that you need. So go to studentaid.gov, read this announcement yourself, and it will tell you a lot about what your next steps are.
Good to know. So for our students who are like still in school or in their forbearance deferment period, what does this mean for them?
Yeah, so really what's going to happen is when you start working for a qualified employer, you start making payments. That's really when this program starts to kick in. And so this is good information to know and to plan for, even if you're not in a scenario where you're starting to make qualifying payments. That's probably what you need to know at this point.
Great. Peyton asked,
what if you're a student and working full time? Well, you could start paying on your loans, right? So, I mean, most students are in a place where they're not paying on their loans. They're given kind of this a deferment for just being a student. And so most are just not making qualifying payments, right? And so this is one thing that we talk about, like with doctors, for instance, like during residency, they don't have to make payments on their loans. But if they want to start the clock on long-term loan forgiveness, or they want to start qualifying for some of these special programs, unfortunately, that means you have to start paying, because you can't make a qualifying payment if you don't make one. Well, now you can do it if it's like delayed or partial or all sorts of crazy stuff, but you can't get credit if you didn't make a payment at all, or at least even a partial payment or what have you. So that's something to think about. What are your goals right now, and do you want to start the clock?
Great, that's good to know as a student. And then we have one kind of specific one in the Q&A. Their employer never defined full-time or part-time because they were the only employee. The salary doesn't line up to be a full-time salary. And she thought the paperwork, or they thought the paperwork specified 30 hours a week. Do you have any guidance for that?
Yeah, that's a pretty niche problem. I'm not sure I have an exact answer for that. My guess is you would likely have to work with the servicer to figure out what documentation they would require in that scenario. Another option too is the Department of Education actually has a hotline that you can call, and it might be a great question for them as well. I don't have that hotline right in front of me, but I can try to pull it up and put it in the chat as we're kind of finishing up these questions.
Right. Well, if the audience has any more to send in, my box is empty, or if I've missed one, you want to send it again, we can get it asked.
Yeah, so the servicer might be a great place to start, but this may also be an option. This is that hotline for the Federal Student Aid Information Center. Oh, sorry, I just sent that. I didn't send that out to everyone. Here we go. Try number 2. So it's 1-800-433-3243. By the way, if you're dealing with things like FAFSA, a lot of people don't realize this exists. They just don't know that they can actually call and ask about like questions they have on the FAFSA. This is the same hotline.
So many resources.
Yeah,
you just don't know
our
about
tax
it.
dollars, right? So it's good to know.
Absolutely.
Well, it is looking like we're at the end of our audience questions. A big, big thank you to you, Jason, for sharing your expertise and your enthusiasm for this topic. I'm so glad we were able to have this webinar. Big shout out to Tabby. Thank you for taking time out of your busy undergraduate schedule and being an excellent host. I want to remind everyone that we did record this session, and we will be posting it on CNP Central so that you can access it at a later date and just internalize this fabulous information that was shared today. So again, thank you to our presenters, and we will be hosting another webinar on a different topic on December 13th. We will be sending out information. It's about how to brand yourself and as a CNP as you're in the workforce and what the workforce looks like in these times. So we're looking forward to that webinar again on December 13th. Thank you all for joining, and have a great day.
And Keely, I had one more thing too.
Please.
If people want to reach out to me, my contact information, jason@gradmetrics.com. That's GRADMETRICS.com. You can also call me or text me at 816-601-2002. And I would say that's the better option today. I'm having a technical issue with my email that should be resolved by tomorrow. But if you send me an email right now, it will likely get kicked back. So either wait till tomorrow or call or text me instead. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have afterwards.
Thank you so much for being a resource to us, Jason. We so appreciate it. And with that, I think it's a wrap. Have a great afternoon, everyone.